This is Mark McNeese, and you're listening to One Thing or Another, interviews and conversations. Welcome to the podcast. This is your host, Mark McNeese, and my guest today is Angelica Herrera Venson, the head of Kapok Aging and Caregiving Resources. Angelica has worked in the field of aging in diverse communities for about 2 decades. Her training is in epidemiology and public health with a focus on aging. Angelica is a former professor and academic and has researched and published articles on related topics, including the quality of care of diabetes, depression in older age, health disparities among Hispanic and other minority elders, and family caregiving challenges in vulnerable populations. Angelica, how are you today?
I'm doing great this morning. Thank you, Mark, for having me.
My pleasure. Now, just give people some information about you, where you live, and because we had a little time zone to figure out here, and some information on who you are.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Arizona is a little tricky in that sense, is that we don't change time zones at all. But yeah, I'm here in the Chandler, Arizona area. I live here with my husband and my 5-year-old daughter. But I have lived in many corners of the country throughout my personal and professional life. I did actually grow up in San Diego near the U.S.-Mexico border. And this was back in the 80s when, let me date myself, but back then, people moved very freely between the two countries. So I've lived in Mexico for about 7 years, and have also lived in Houston, Washington, D.C., New York. It's been fun times. And I was in the D.C. area during the time that I was completing a health and aging policy fellowship. And then in the Baltimore area, when I was, doing some of my academic training, and was teaching and doing my research over at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. But professionally, I do consider, just like you said, I do consider myself to be a gerontologist. Many people don't know what on earth that is, but it is a person who is in a profession that's focused on older adults, or the study of aging. So it could be someone in nursing, a social worker. For me, that passion was public health. So I do have my master's and doctorate in public health, and but I started off really working on the front lines in community health. Went on to work in academia, doing my research. And I did eventually leave academia. It's great to publish, but, I don't like work just sitting on, the bookshelves, or now, in an online expensive repository of academic journals. So I did end up moving to an organization, the National Council on Aging, soon after I left academia, and it was an amazing ride. Really, it's a very reputable nonprofit organization that's working to help vulnerable seniors, help promote, policy across the board. So, it's been, fantastic. And I, as I mentioned, I did start off in the community, with community health centers. I taught everything from, around HIV/AIDS prevention, healthy eating, to migrant farm workers. This was like in Southern California. Many of the farm workers, obviously had very limited, resources. We also provided, education and support to mostly migrant workers who were actually in San Diego, in that San Diego rural area at the time, who were tending to horses that, raced on the racetrack. Mm-hmm. But they too, their living conditions were awful. So some of, our support was in the form of, here's how to clean your water. Yeah. So it's,
oh, wow.
Yes, and then so thereafter, in New York City, I had the opportunity to work at the NYU Cancer Center for Immigrant Health. I know that at some point they later moved to Sloan Kettering, but we supported a cancer care and prevention, a number of research projects, but that involved a lot of extensions into community work. I think that's where being raised mostly Mexican American, it was my first true kind of multicultural experience, where you really cannot one size does not fit all, and you really had to tailor, we really had to tailor our approach to our education, our research, everything for each of the 6 or 8 communities that we were working with. It was absolutely, exciting. But we worked with Haitian, Dominican, Mexican, Korean, Chinese, a number of other immigrant groups, all around, kind of cancer prevention work. And as I mentioned, you could not take one approach and then dump it into another community. And that has been the basis, too, of why I work now on the Kapok, side and those resources. But, for example, you could not go into a Korean community, if you didn't have a white coat and a professional title. You would not be taken seriously.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and if we had 2 female Korean social workers who were completely fluent in Korean. It did not matter to do all the negotiations on collaborations, partnerships. We had to take, it was our lead doctor, Caucasian, white, who was the person who had to make those negotiations. So it was very different. Of course, in the Latino community, it was a little easier, for some of our team members. We had to, obviously we were able to break the language barrier. I'm fluent in Spanish. But, as long as we made ourselves present, we had a couple of meals, with some of the senior staff in our community-based organizations. And thereafter, the doors open. Once you have that, that friendship, that open communication, I could get them on board with almost any initiative. Like, hey, we're sending out we need your support letter on this. Can I get that signed? Sure, okay. Everything went faster once we had formed those solid, partnerships. But again, it was very different. And I remember also we were working with a group of mostly Jamaican women, and we were on the subject of prostate cancer. And and obviously in this in my line of work around health education and what have you, you always have to consider what are some deep-seated misconceptions or myths or views about why someone gets a condition or a disease, right? With Alzheimer's, for example, there's very common belief that that deterioration and cognitive decline is normal, right? But we know obviously that that's not the case. And then with prostate cancer, there was a very deep-seated belief that prostate cancer is something that happened to men because they were, philanderers and because they were promiscuous. And at that time, I remember, I was out there giving a little pep talk on getting their husbands to be screened for prostate cancer and what have you. And around that time, Rudy Giuliani had just been diagnosed, and I use him as an example. And that was my mistake because they were quick to shoot me down and say, oh, well, you know why he got, the prostate cancer because, he was, philandering and so on. So I kind of learned my lesson there, but you have to always be aware of these, kind of beliefs and misconceptions and address them, head on. But sometimes you don't know what those are until you spend enough time in, different minority communities. And of course, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you to ask you about Kapok.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what inspired you to start that? And also, if you could explain the name for listeners.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think, very much, same reason you may have started, your blog is that you saw a niche. You saw a gaping hole of information. And, I know that there is a lot of literature, a lot of, even, caregiving, excellent caregiving, guidebooks, blogs, websites out there and organizations devoted to family caregiving. But I saw nothing that really spoke to some of the unique challenges that, a lot of, first generation and immigrant and minority communities in particular were facing. And so that's where initially my website actually started off as a resource for my students, and then once I left academia, kind of switched gears and kind of redirected its focus, for that reason.
What's the name mean? tell people what the name
Yeah,
where the name
yeah,
comes from?
kapok. Yeah, no. So kapok is it's another word for the ceiba tree, and the ceiba tree, it's the sacred tree of the Maya, and so that's Mayan is where I have my indigenous roots, but the ceiba tree is Mayan mythology. It really is that the tree of life. The sense that the roots are in the underworld, and top of the tree is, kind of facing upward toward the heaven. But it also, kind of reminds me of, that sense of how throughout life, we really have this, we end up where we started in a way. And life is this, kind of a progression of many life events and accumulation of, all the good and bad that happens in our lives. In fact, in gerontology now, we have there's more focus on looking at aging, from the life course perspective, right? That, it's when you're studying aging, it's not just like, we can't just truncate, at 55 and say, these are seniors and this is the group I'm going to focus on. But, that how a person, grows old, and what their old age may look like is going to, depend heavily on how they manage everything in their life. Now, of course, a great deal of that will be truly, environmental and out of their hands. But there's much that they can also, change. A person who obviously, for example, mismanaged their money, or who, scared away every friend or family, and those are individuals who in their older age, might have less friends or family around them, or who may, struggle financially to meet their long-term care needs because they never took a moment to really step back and manage, their finances. And again, that's their behaviors alone aren't going to dictate, their old age entirely, but people have more control over how they grow old than they truly do.
Now, how do you decide what topics you and your team are write about? Because they're on your site. There are a lot of articles, and how do you come up with what you want to write about?
Yes, and part of it is it's a balancing act, because there's going to be things that we want to write about that nobody else, that we suspect, okay, nobody's going to care about this, but we know that our readers should be informed on this, and we have to find very creative ways of inserting those important bits of information into other, more, exciting topics. But we do our research. We, of course, have a number of tools at our disposal to look at, what's trending, what are people searching for, but also we're on, dozens of different caregiving forums. And so we're always keeping an ear out for what people are looking for and what are some of the challenges that family caregivers are facing. But most importantly, now that we have, more of a readership, we get emails. So we get emails, we get questions, comments. So we also look at the track record of existing articles, and we start to see a trend. We notice, that there's definitely a lot of interest in articles on, how to deal with difficult parents, how to have that difficult conversation about finances. What happens if I don't want to or can't care for my aging parent, et cetera. So all those, we start to see a trend, and like, okay, there's a pattern there, and we look at, what aspects of that issue is not kind of fully covered. So, Kathy Green, who's, our content developer and, really manages the kind of ins and outs on a day-to-day basis of the website, and myself, we're, we research. We're very much into the data, the numbers, and so we're constantly keeping track of what new research is out there, and as much as so making sure that really our readers are getting the latest and greatest. So that's definitely one. But we did take a deep dive, like maybe in middle of 2019, to just take a step back and make sure that we were still staying true to what the intended goal of the website was. that we were covering, even as we planned out, the timeline of our calendar of what was going to be posted and when, that we were covering topics like in a good rotation, that we had central themes around aging in place, around, the multicultural, challenges that we saw there was a lot of interest in food. So we're trying to kind of, there always is, right? We need to eat. And so that there's, and a lot of interest in how do you find the right assisted living? Is it the right time? And all these issues, kind of making sure that we're providing enough of the content. And one thing we saw a huge deficit in what the content was around finances. So we've really made a big push to bring in more articles, more information on the finances. So we did a whole piece on the Social Security, and so it's really very responsive, but very much, we do our research.
Yeah, I could see that. And a little earlier, you talked about different, cultural differences, that there are always going to be cultural differences with whatever group that you're working with. And you talked about that. Are there some common threads that apply across cultures in terms of caregiving and working with older people?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So the money is a big one. Is how will I finance this? Because most of America does not have the savings or the finances to really cover the kind of long-term care that we may need, after the age of 65 and 70. So, a large, portion of us will need some care at some point, and it could be even short-term, where after a stroke, after a hospital, after a fall, and you may even require that short-term intensive, rehabilitation and kind of home care. And few people have saved enough. At the National Council on Aging, we often talked about the, being one away from a crisis, one away from a crisis, and that could be that it is just that one hospitalization where now you're really left, with nothing, and your every last, bit of your Social Security or your pension is going to pay off that, that last hospital bill. So, so again, even if people think they have some, it's usually, going to be really, zapped up in that first crisis. So there's a lot. So that's a very important common thread, is that financial piece, especially, on who does that financial obligation, fall upon. And that's where we do see some cultural differences in that, more recent minority immigrants, and, minorities tend to take on more of the financial burden, than their parents. But still, it's a common issue, definitely across the board, the financial challenges.
And I see, I work, and I'm retiring from full-time work in April. I'm still going to work part-time for the extra money and the socialization. But I've seen many older workers, lots of them, who keep working because they have to. They're collecting Social Security, but a shocking number of Americans rely on Social Security as their sole income. And so they end up working in grocery stores or wherever they can work. I mean, I was working with a gentleman, a very nice guy. He just turned 80 yesterday, or it was his birthday. He's working because he has to, and I guess he's going to work until he dies on the job. I don't know, but it's not, it's not a good situation for an awful lot of older Americans.
No, you hit it right on the nail, and it's actually a topic we recently published a piece that we have one that's just your guide really to managing and getting set up and understanding the basics of Social Security. But we recently published another piece that speaks to what you're talking about, and that's just understanding the fact that the vast number of older adults will rely on only Social Security as their primary source of income. And so how do you avoid that? And but we have a number of pieces too where we talk about the workforce. How do you decide on whether to keep a part-time job, and also what impact does that have on your Social Security earnings? And you want to manage that carefully. That you work one more hour than is your max, and then boom, you get a slice cut from your social. So it's a balancing act. But we also speak to, just like you said, there's social benefits of and health benefits of continuing to work and staying active and staying connected to others. So it is, because even people who don't have to work, right? Like you said, they will choose to work for sometimes for that reason. But it's getting, folks set up to really manage the coming, onslaught of, caregiving expenses and, personal expenses. And of course, we always tried on our site, we really focus it on the, from the caregiver's perspective. I don't think I've even mentioned this so far, but I actually just finished a book. It's actually the Multicultural Guide to Caregiving. It's basically done. My publisher and editor, she actually, she's based out of Louisiana, and right now she had to evacuate. So hopefully, once she gets back, we're going to go ahead and move forward with getting, just the cover done and getting it ready for publication. But it is ready, and one of the key things, a major focus of that book is, the importance of looking at, if you're a caregiver, the same idea that when the airplane's going down, you got to give yourself oxygen first before you can help somebody else. And, our tendency, and sometimes, the sense of guilt and obligation to care for an aging relative, a parent or otherwise, you start to shell out money, and without having a hard look at your own financial plan. What does your own budget look like? Can you afford that? And especially, those like that are in my, I'm in my mid 40s, and, many, men and women in my age group, if you are doing financially okay, you might feel that, sure, I can, shell this out for these services or home care or whatever, but that will add up. And what about your own retirement? And what about your own savings? What about paying off that house, or those student loans? And so we talk a lot. I talk a lot about that in my book, and on the site is how to juggle that, because and as I mentioned, there are definitely those distinctions in different cultural groups. I know Chinese parents. I know that a lot of Chinese adult children say that they feel a strong sense of financial obligation to totally, cover every 100% of the cost of their aging parent. That's a little bit more so than I see with other, communities. But it's a burden. And when for more, recently immigrated, minorities, or who still have, they may be doing long distance caregiving, and they're sending remittances back to their aging parent in their home country. How do they do that safely, and how much can they actually spend without exhausting their own resources? And it gets tricky too. So that's one of the things we talk about too on the site, but also in my book, is just how to do that safely, because you're also sending money to a vulnerable senior in another country. And, for some of us that, that come from a country where that's a developing nation, I know, let me say straight up, in Mexico, you really want to be careful. You don't want your grandmother or aging relative to get, swindled, or have, all of their resources, robbed, because the system is crooked. So these are things that we talk about, but those are considerations that, most of us growing up here in the U.S. might not even take into consideration. But those, some of our readers who are, involved in a lot of international caregiving, it's a lot of money spent too, just traveling back and forth, across the seas or, across the borders, and, trying to keep an eye out, for those family members, making sure that they're in a safe space, that they aren't, taken advantage of. It's really very tough.
Now, I had one more question before we wrap up. It has to. Initially, I was thinking about asking you about some apps, but more broadly speaking, because I also think that there's a lack of access to internet access for income levels too. It's not just elderly people, but why are older people technologically challenged. I'm 62. I'm not a young thing, but I'm technically very savvy. So sometimes I wonder, like, why is it a resistance to technology, or I don't quite understand why. It's also assumed. It's assumed that if you're older, you don't know how to turn on a phone, which is, I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right, and two very different issues. One is that is the access issue. The other is the familiarity with the technology, and just the overall literacy. So if we're 62, very young, right? And I mean, like I said, I'm in my mid-40s, and I have, I'm technologically challenged, here and there. But it's there. I know the stats are anywhere from, they say at least 50% of seniors, do have a smartphone and are, connected. But these surveys, some are from Gallup and other, kind of reputable sources. The challenge is that even those, and I know ARP has done a few studies and surveys on, the use of, technology, and it's always it's a matter of getting down into the weeds. Is that there are certain things that seniors, are going to be comfortable with, using technology for, going to the ATM, for example, to withdraw money. Some people are comfortable with, social media and, Facebook, but it's, now programming your television, that's a whole nother, that's actually on the high end of complexity, believe it or not. Yeah. But no, we have found that, once that there are proven strategies for how to get older adults comfortable with all levels of technology. We actually just published a piece on this. I think it's called Tutoring Technology for Seniors. It's a piece I wrote, and it's kind of a high-level overview, a few steps, the do's and don'ts on how to work with an older adult to get them comfortable with the technology. And, some of the basic things that we forget from, the repetition, from leaving some kind of laminated, step-by-step with pictures, everything, that they can easily refer to. So those things help that older adult to really become comfortable and confident that they can, use the technology. That said, it's really important. We have to bridge that digital divide. There's a number of, great tools and resources that are absolutely helpful. You have a lot of great medication management applications online. There's, my go-to that I always recommend is that MyFitnessPal. It's a free tool.
Oh yeah,
great way to, right. It's free. I always love the free ones, and the convenient ones. But those, those happen to be, apps that are always useful. The other that I know a lot of older adults get into is, games, online games, and that's totally fine, but as long as they're not under the impression that those applications, like, they have some that are, brain training games and memory games. The truth of the matter is that there is not enough research to show that those are really effective. That where there is a little bit of research is when you are referring to those, those games that are, I think they call them like XR games, where, let's say, I'm thinking like the Wii console, where you're doing a little bit of, physical activity, but it's part of, it's kind of gamified. That there's research that it may help with some kind of mild cognitive impairment, but even that, the lack of quality studies out there is really, it's the big issue. So it's not something that people should not go into these games or pay lots of money for those, thinking that it's going to keep, it's going to stave off, dementia or Alzheimer's. No, that's always going to be, improve your diet, get screened early and regularly. But the games alone won't definitely do that. And I know that, we're talking earlier about just the digital divide. It's something true that, it may not be a resistance to having smartphones or using those, but merely just an access issue. I know that with our community health centers that serve here in Arizona, in my current day job, I support quality improvement for it's a network of 7 community health centers where we're pushing the Medicaid value-based contracting and and management. But our health centers, especially during COVID, I mean, they really had to totally change the way that they saw patients, and many of them are serving older adults in rural areas or in American Indian on reservations in the area. And often some of the tricks that they had was to allow to distribute tablets to seniors, especially older adults that may have had multiple chronic conditions, and they knew they were at risk and wanted to keep a closer eye on. So they gave them tablets. They kind of had to walk them through how to use those, and then sometimes, because broadband is very limited in these rural areas, they had to they would invite the seniors or whoever was driving them to come to the health center, stay in the parking lot, and do the virtual visit from the parking lot. Because and they had to find that workaround. So sometimes it's not even a matter of can they get familiar with the technology, but it's that access. So that definitely is changing, and hopefully if oh my God, what is it not from Amazon. We will have broadband, worldwide soon enough, and I think in a matter of a few years, I think that is possible, and if we get there, that'll certainly go a long way.
Well, Angelica, it's been really nice to talk to you and learn more about what you do. How can people? What's the URL? What's the website address for people to go to find Kapok?
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, the name is multiculturalcaregiving.net.
Also, they can I think they can Google KAPOC. They'll find you, but that's your URL. Yes. And there's
right, and that's
a lot of good articles there. I highly recommend that people check the site out. Your content is excellent, and
thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a delight to talk to you. I love your energy.
Likewise. Oh my God. Well, you keep up your great work, and my best wishes to you and your listeners, and hope to hear from some of them.
All right. Well,
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. This is Mark McNeese, and you've been listening to One Thing or Another: Interviews and Conversations.